So let's go straight to our first guest, Fiona Hill, now a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and an expert on Russia. She was an advisor to 3 men who held the most powerful office in the world. But as a woman from the north of England, she came up against challenges and has a remarkable insight into how one president, Donald Trump, dealt with world leaders and women in power. Fiona, thanks so much for coming on the show. I've been looking forward to meeting you, so I'm really glad you're here. And I wanted to kick off with where you came from. Let's start with who you are. You're a working-class girl from the northeast, and you ended up advising 3 presidents on foreign policy. To those who don't know you, can you join the dots in a way that makes sense to people about where you started and where you got to?
Yeah, look, it was very much the product of time and place. As you mentioned, working class, but I grew up in the north of England, in County Durham, small town Bishop Auckland, at a time when basically the bottom had totally fallen out of the local economy. I was born in 1965. At that time, the local coal mines are closing down. My dad had been a coal miner. The only job he'd been able to find when all the mines had closed down was in the local hospital and the National Health Service in Bishop Auckland as a porter, beginning on really the lowest of the economic rungs there and having to sort of reinvent himself. And when I was leaving school in 1984, not only were all the mines, it was all, British nationalised industry, British Rail, British Coal, British Steel, British Shipbuilding, the National Health Service. I mean, pretty much everybody I knew worked in the nationalised sectors and not in the private sector. Unemployment in the town was really high, but unemployment for youth across the entire country was very high. Only 90% of kids leaving school in 1984 didn't immediately have something to go on to. And I was very lucky. I was in that 5 or 6% of kids who had the ability to go to college or polytechnic university, doing my A-levels. And the local education authority, in this case County Durham, because of the basis of means testing, and if I'd done well enough, would pay for me the chance to go to college. And my dad basically said to me at the time, look, Pet, there's nothing for you here.
Yeah,
if you get a chance to go to university and you get a chance to the education that he hadn't got, he left school at 14, you've got to take it. But really, the reason that I was able to take that opportunity was because my local education authority paid for all the fees and a maintenance grant for me to go to university. And that kind of ability to do that now has really reduced. I mean, it was, again, time and place. Place, my dad pushing me out to go somewhere else and to do something else because there wasn't any jobs in Bishop Auckland at the time. But the ability, because of local education authority, educational grants. And then I was able, after that, to get a scholarship to go to Harvard University in 1989, again because of money, not that was given by the government, but that money that had been endowed to Harvard University by, a benefactor. It was actually Frank Knox, the former Secretary for the US for the Navy in World War II, who had given money for the British Commonwealth. And I got that grant to go to Harvard. So all the way along, the reason that I'm where I am today is because there was a grant, a subsidy, a fellowship, a scholarship, some kind of assistance. I mean, I couldn't have done this on my own without that.
Now, you went on to advise 3 US presidents. You are an expert on Russia. You have written a book on Putin. You've obviously just written another book. Donald Trump, you advised Donald Trump. When did you realise it wasn't going to work out between you and Donald Trump? Was it sudden, or was it this gradual realisation that I'm not going to be able to do business with this guy, he's just not?
It was right from the very beginning. I mean, when people say you advised Trump, I didn't advise him on anything. In fact, very few people did, because he didn't really listen to advice and he just wasn't particularly interested. And he had a kind of a vision of who should be an advisor anywhere. And it certainly wasn't, a kind of middle-aged woman with a funny accent. And from the very beginning, it was basically, who are you? What could you possibly know about, any of this?
Were there any sort of women you think he would take advice from, or was it just anti-women?
No, it wasn't anti-women. I mean, there were women that he trusted and worked with for a long time. I mean, somebody like, people will be familiar with Kellyanne Conway. I do think he had quite a bit of respect for her, his own daughter, Ivanka Trump. I mean, the times when he clearly listened to her. There were others who were in his orbit. We hear about Hope Hicks, for example, who was one of his assistants. So it wasn't just that. It was just, that trust and, you know, who they were. You know, I've actually saw him interact with people like Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, and listening to her, she explained a lot of things to him in various meetings. He took her seriously because she was a Chancellor of Germany. It was kind of who you were and how you were related to him that was important.
Did he take Theresa May seriously? Because I remember watching how he treated her, because I saw it at Prescott, and I thought he was not always respectful to her.
No, look, I think, you know, this is a bit of a bizarre thing to say. She would have been better off if she spoke another language other than English. Trump, you know, responds to people like... I was going to use Putin as an example, right? He had to listen to him. People go, oh, my God, he was always talking to Putin for great length, because it had to be translated. And so part of the whole power of people like Putin, or even, you know, Angela Merkel, you know, if she's decided to speak in German, was that Trump had to actually listen because he didn't know the language. And he couldn't interrupt them. And he couldn't kind of hone in on something they said because he had to hear them out. Whereas with Theresa May, I mean, he immediately could just interrupt her. And, you know, he often did that with other people as well, particularly if they had an accent. I mean, you know, for example, Macron of France, if he spoke in English rather than in French, and, you know, he was stumbling for a word or he didn't use quite the right word, Trump would hone in and immediately interrupt them.
Okay.
Because that was kind of his style. And also, if your voice was of a higher register, as Theresa May's could be, I mean, I'm cognizant of that myself. I mean, I don't speak in a particularly low register. Trump would immediately see that as a kind of sign of weakness. And it was also people's electoral status. So after Theresa May, for example, called the snap election and her majority was reduced, he saw that as weakness. It was kind of a reflection of his own fears of, you know, having a reduced majority and how that made people think about you. His epitome of the strong, powerful leader was a guy who spoke in a big, deep voice and who, you know, kind of basically, in his view, then commanded attention.
Did you ever see him interact with Theresa May?
I did, and many other people as well. I had the whole of Europe in my portfolio, not just Russians.
Did it make you angry? Did you find it angry when you thought she's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
I found it very irritating because he did that with other people as well. I mean, as I said, he would interrupt people, he would jump in on them, he wouldn't, you know, listen to them, you know, with respect. There was not just that mutual respect with people.
And about you, I read in an interview, actually I also read it, it's in your book, that you said that you were referred to by his chief of staff as, I hope you don't mind me repeating this, as the Russia bitch.
Yeah, I learned that after the fact, actually. It was a journalist who was writing a kind of a profile of me for one of the American magazines and who interviewed a lot of people around that. And he said, did you know they called you that? And I was like, no, but I wasn't particularly surprised. This wasn't, you know, across the board. This was the kind of coterie of people around Trump.
His chief of staff.
Yeah, and it was basically, who does she think she is? You know, she thinks she knows all of this stuff.
But you do know all that stuff.
But it's that, it's that repudiation. I mean, look, you know, as a woman, I mean, you and I and many women in public life and many women not in public life have to basically put up with that kind of dismissiveness.
Well, actually, now you've said it, I wanted to ask you about something. I hope you're across it because obviously you live in the US, but there has been an issue today, and I think we've got the newspaper article whereby Angela Rayner, who is the deputy Labour leader, has had a rather, well, very misogynistic article directed there. You can see it there, Stone the Crows, Tories accuse Rayner of basic instinct ploy to distract Boris. You can see Angela Rayner there, and they're likening it to Sharon Stone there in basic instinct, likening her to the deputy leader of the Labour Party. There's a quote in that piece of Angela Rayner where this is an anonymous Conservative MP saying she knows she can't compete with Boris's Oxford Union debating training, but she has other skills which he lacks. Angie left school at 16, from a working class background, had a baby, is now an extremely successful politician. What do you think about that quote, about that article?
Well, I think it's just a classic misogynistic put-down. I mean, quite recently, after I've been speaking out, you know, Donald Trump said about me, she'd be nothing without that accent, which, of course, is ironic, because in a UK context, you know, the accent marks me as being working class from the north of England, and we get other kinds of comments, you know, in the UK, you know, obviously one view of an accent, in the US another. But it's just that kind of put-down, like you just said about the Russia bitch. When people feel intimidated by women in powerful positions, which is clearly the case with Angela Rayner, I'm not wanting to be offensive to readers of the Daily Mail, but, that always, I'm not surprised that there's this kind of commentary that people don't try to check themselves when they're writing, these kinds of things. And absolutely just what you said. It's indicative of the problem that women have over and over again in public life. It doesn't matter what kind of background that they have, but especially people from the working class. I'm also told by people, oh, well, look, there's lots of people like you who've risen up in the time, since you have. That's just not true. And, show me the number of working class women, with a northern accent or any kind of accent that would mark them there, who are in public life. And then, case in point, Angela Rayner, as you said, really remarkable, unbelievably remarkable career and personal trajectory. As I said, leaving school after 16, having to raise, a child on her own. I saw in that picture, she's not wearing anything different from I am. What are women supposed to wear? What are we, telling people? And there's an element, in my book that I talk about, right from the very beginning when I had to give evidence in the impeachment trial. The first thing that I was told was, we'll have to figure out what you're going to wear. And I was like, not what I'm going to say. The preparation for how I'm going to answer the questions, but about what you're going to wear so you're not distracting. So that people won't look at you and say, oh, God, look at that woman.
I know that feeling. Just before, I want to get on to Russia and Ukraine, because you're an expert and I really want to... I've got so many questions to ask you. One thing about Trump, the impeachment trial, you became a national figure. You are now very well known in the US, and you were highly praised for how you handled that testimony that you had to give. But in the book too, you write about how a lot of friends and associates had warned you against working at the White House under Trump. Do you regret not heeding those warnings? Was it a mistake to go and try to work for him?
No, I don't think it was a mistake at all, because I did it in the spirit of public service, patriotism for the United States at a time when the Russians and Putin had messed around in US politics and had created an absolute chaos on the domestic front that we're still dealing with now. And, I'd written a whole book with a colleague about Putin. I'd been in the National Intelligence Council, so I'd been an intel analyst. It wasn't that I didn't know what Putin was up to. I think where I should have been more careful when I went in, because I did pay attention to what they said and I took it very seriously. I wanted to make sure I didn't get, kind of embroiled in the domestic politics, was really doing my homework about some of the other people who were there. Because I knew more about the Kremlin and all sorts of dirty politics than I really did about how this political machine was working around Trump. This personal coterie, the personalisation of everything.
On our trip to India last week with the Prime Minister, he said he became the first G7 leader to explicitly say he thinks Putin will win this war or could win this war. He's right, isn't he? He is going to win, but you would say he has to meet any cost. What does that look like?
Well, it doesn't look good for him either. When we say win, define a win, right? There's a pyrrhic victory. In other words, when, things are devastated as a result of it. And we could very easily see Putin himself prevailing by still being in office in the same way that Bashar al-Assad has done it in Syria. Complete devastation of the country, but he's still there. That is exactly... But for Putin, that would be a win. It wouldn't be a win for anybody else, by their definition, and not for the Russian people either, or for Russian oligarchs, or for, kind of the Russian military. That would not be a win, but for Putin it will be, because he has prevailed and his act of will has been borne out. And yes, he has devastated the Russian economy, but in his view, will already have devastated Ukraine and shown us who's the boss. You
understand his mind probably better than a lot of people. What does it look... What's the on-the-ground result for him that makes him claim victory or allows him to claim victory or gives him an off-ramp, right, so he can end the war?
Yeah, he wants us to take an off-ramp and the Ukrainians to sue for surrender. So ending the war would be declaring victory. And it might look something along the lines of what he said to George W. Bush in 2008, which is, George, Ukraine isn't a real country. Part of it is in Eastern Europe and part of it was given to us or part of it belongs to us. And you can just imagine him being in possession of the whole of the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, the rubble of Mariupol and all the cities around the Sea of Azov, all the northern parts of Crimea, linking all of that together, Crimea to eastern Ukraine, having Odessa and the other fabled Black Sea ports of Ukraine in jeopardy as well, and Ukraine effectively cut off from the Black Sea and dismembered. And that looks like a win to Putin.
How does it end for him? I interviewed Chris Steele the other day and he said he didn't see a way back, that he can't lead Russia after this all ends, in a way. How does it end for Putin? A palace coup? He died? he prevails and he just grinds it out over another decade with Russia the pariah of the world, or the West at least?
Yeah, all of those things. Because that's, you know, I mentioned Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We said Assad should be gone in, what was it, 2012? 10 years on, he's still there. Robert Mugabe, we kind of felt there's no way that he could keep on going in Zimbabwe. So much, you know, pushback against him. He just goes and dies in his position. We've still got Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. We've got, you know, we had the Castros one after another in Cuba. You know, every time people said, oh, surely this must be the end. I mean, I think it's exactly that. It could be a combination of all of those things. But it also could be, you know, there could be a change. I mean, we've often been caught out before, right? Nobody expected Gorbachev to come along. And even under Medvedev, when Putin sort of stepped back and put Dmitry Medvedev into the presidency for a while, there was a bit of a change of pace as well as a change of face. You know, we don't have crystal balls. Something unexpected can always happen.
But you don't think that there is an internal... there's an eternal rebellion against him, that there aren't people around him that will think this has gone too far? You don't think there's an internal coup scenario, really? It's
possible. We saw that with Gorbachev, right? When Gorbachev was pushing through, you know, kind of reforms, and there was a pushback by hardliners. It's entirely possible that, but again, I can't say in what kind of time frame, that pressure builds up because of massive losses in the military. There's a backlash again from soldiers' mothers and their families, that, you know, people around start to put blame where it's due, which is on Putin and the tiny coterie of people who've made this decision, and say, look, we've got to stop this, but we can't necessarily stop it with him there.
If you were advising President Biden now, what would you advise him to do in terms of the short term into the medium term? Well,
the short term, we've got to, and the medium term and the long term, we've got to stay unified as the West pushing back. We've also got to extend the diplomatic front. Because one of the things that we're really worried about is Putin and a nuclear weapon. I mean, you haven't asked that, but it's the thing that looms, always. And that's unacceptable, what he's doing. Threatening to, you know, basically, if you don't back off and give me Ukraine, I'm going to blow you all up. Or I'm going to, you know, set off a demonstration, tactical nuclear weapon there. We should be out there with every other nuclear power. The UK, of course, is a nuclear power. France is a nuclear power. China's a nuclear power. But so are India and Pakistan, everywhere else, and say, look what he's doing. So diplomacy on that front, sticking together to blunt the Russian military operation, and being dedicated and committed over the long term, over changes in presidents, political parties. You know, we have to find mechanisms for this to help Ukraine get back on its feet.
But not stepping up military intervention.
Those things are all part of this. We're already in there in terms of all of the support that we've been giving Ukraine. But we have to be careful, because Putin wants it to be about the US and the West and NATO. He wants us to kind of basically be in there, because he's telling the rest of the world, including India and everywhere else where you've just been, this is nothing for you here. This is nothing for you to pay attention to. This is just a fight with us and the West and NATO, and Ukraine is collateral damage. A lot of countries and their leadership believe that. We have to push back against that. That's a short order goal for us, to persuade the Indonesias, Malaysias, you know, and others in Asia, Africa and elsewhere, that, look, what's happening to Ukraine is something you should all be concerned about as well.
And Fiona, they keep telling me I've got to stop because I've run over, which is, I could go on, believe it, it's fascinating. As a child, you said you were scared of nuclear war, and here we are again, a major nuclear power openly threatening using those weapons. Are you scared?
Actually, not in the way that I was. When I was a kid, I was scared of the unknown, because I didn't know how this was all play out. I mean, now I've got some pretty good ideas of how this all plays out. And the whole point of this is we shouldn't be scared and intimidated. For Putin right now, this is a game, even though it's a pretty dangerous one nonetheless, because he's scared. He's scared of being usurped. He's scared that he doesn't have sufficient conventional power. He's scared that we could indeed push him back. He's scared that Ukraine could win. So this is basically the act of a scared person himself. He doesn't say he is, because he has to portray this strength and power, but he's falling back on his nuclear weapon system. So we have to understand where he's coming from, and we have to push back against that. So the whole secret of this is, don't be scared and intimidated, but take some action.
One more question, and they'll tell me off. Could you say to me confidently, though, here now, that you don't think he would use a nuclear weapon, or you simply don't know?
I don't know, and I think he's thinking about how we could use it, you know, as a demonstration effect. In a way, he's already used it because he's talking about it. And we saw what he did in Chernobyl, in terms of sending the military right through the Chernobyl exclusion zone, shelling the Zaporizhia nuclear plant. He's already in that space. And, you know, threatening, you know, moving nukes here and there, and using Iskander missiles and talking about it, that we know can be basically nuclear armed. He's already in that space. So we have to push back. We have to work with others. This is the point where we say to the rest of the world, look, you really want to be in a world with a nuclear free-for-all? That's why we have to put Putin and his, nuclear missiles back in the strategic bottle here. He's basically unleashed the nuclear genie. We have to put that back.
Fiona Hill, thank you so much. We need to go off
thank you so much.
Camera now, because I've got loads more questions.
No, thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Beth. Thank you for having me.
I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.